Hello and welcome once again to the Spouter-Inn. I'm Chris.
And I'm Suzanne, and we're celebrating Jane Austen's 250th birthday, so I've been rereading Pride and Prejudice.
And I've been rereading Northanger Abbey. Listeners, please get yourself a comfy drink, pull up a seat, and join us for a conversation about these books and more here at the Spouter-Inn. Ho-yo, ho, ho-yo, ho, ho-yo, ho, ho. 250 years old this December. We're celebrating a little early, I guess, but I think we're allowed. It's still her year.
It's a lot of years.
It's a lot of years. I happened to be in London earlier this year over the summer, and I was there with a friend, and we were hoping to see in some of the museums some Jane Austen stuff, but it was all on loan to other places in other parts of the world, in particular Australia. I think a lot of it was in because of the 250th, because the celebrations were happening elsewhere. And I guess all the cool kids in the UK are going to the Austen Museum or something. I don't know. We didn't get to see anything. It was really disappointing.
Yeah, it's a weirdly popular, I was going to say weirdly popular book. Here I'm thinking of Pride and Prejudice in particular, but her writings in general too. And there's a real fandom. There's a really substantial fandom out there.
We have covered Austen once before when we looked at Emma a few years ago, but we have been holding off on Pride and Prejudice, which is, the big book, so to speak, in terms of its popularity. So I'm excited to finally get to talk about it. I know that a lot of people turn to Jane Austen and maybe Pride and Prejudice in particular as comfort reading, as reading they come back to again and again because they like to cozy up with it. Either the book or some of the adaptations of it. Does Austen fulfill this role in your life, or is there something else that you turn to for comfort reading?
It has at certain times. I'm casting my mind back. Like there was periods of time in my life where it really definitely was comfort reading. And I'm thinking about why that is. And I think it's like two things. Maybe these are obvious observations, but two things. One is that like there is a happy ending. Like, you go through it, but you know that you're going to end up in this, what at one point the character of Elizabeth Bennet calls the happiest, wisest, most rational outcome. Everything is going to work out. So that way it's a little bit like Shakespeare comedies, where they tie up everything in a bow. So there's that. But then there's also this kind of frisson, this undercurrent of emotion throughout the book that's like largely submerged below the surface. And for some reason that works really well in comfort reading because it's not all explicit, right? But it's almost there. And I think comfort reading really thrives on that kind of emotional temperature.
Yeah, I think there's something about the authorial voice, especially in Pride and Prejudice, maybe some of our other books as well, where in addition to the characters being interesting and fun to go on their adventures or being sort of pleasantly risible or whatever, you can make fun of them, I suppose. But you also get this very assured person guiding you through the story, right? The narrator is doing this. You find this also in Middlemarch, right? One of the joys of Middlemarch is George Eliot's narrator's voice there, which is deeply comfortable and why some people return to that as a comfort book, I suppose. Yeah, no, it's very good that way. Of course, also, Pride and Prejudice in particular, we'll talk about this in a moment, I'm sure. It's very, very funny.
I was just going to say, it's absolutely hilarious, right? And I mean, as I was rereading it today, I've read this book a million times, and I was rereading it, I was laughing out loud now and then, just because the characters are so ridiculous. And that comes back to what you were saying about the narrator and the comfort read. The narrator kind of knows what's going on. The narrator is really, I don't know what the word is, kind of sophisticated. And you as a reader feel like you're in on it with the narrator. And so there's this kind of companionship almost you have with the narrator all the way through. And I think that's part of the comfort read too.
Yeah, I agree. I haven't read Austen except for reading Emma for the podcast. I haven't really read her in a fair while, although when I was younger, I read her quite a bit and returned to her often and even put off reading one of her novels, one of her main 6 novels, Mansfield Park, which I've never read because I wanted to sort of keep one under glass for a case of emergency. I could break it and have one fresh. I mean, there's Juvenilia that I haven't read either, but like one of her proper novels, have it there just in case I ever needed one fresh Austen. And I haven't broken that glass yet, but maybe I will someday. Who knows?
Mr. Darcy has no defect. He owns it himself without disguise. No, said Darcy, I have made no such pretension. I have faults enough, but they are not, I hope, of understanding. My temper I dare not vouch for. It is, I believe, too little yielding. certainly too little for the convenience of the world. My feelings are not puffed about with every attempt to move them. My temper would perhaps be called resentful. My good opinion, once lost, is lost forever. That is a failing indeed, cried Elizabeth. Implacable resentment is a shade and a character, but you've chosen your fault well. I really cannot laugh at it. You're safe from me. There is, I believe, in every disposition a tendency to some particular evil, a natural defect, which not even the best education can overcome. And your defect is a propensity to hate everybody. And yours, he replied with a smile, is willfully to misunderstand them. So Jane Austen, I'm going to say a little bit about her, though we did do a kind of an overview of her biography way back when we did an episode on Emma. So she's born in 1775 to a genteel but not wealthy family. Her father was a clergyman. And the way it's put in the preface to the edition of Pride and Prejudice I was rereading today, it says, the family was well-connected but not rich. And those two facts, well-connected but not rich, are kind of all you really need to know about the world, the social world that's depicted in these books. Jane Austen was a writer, and a writer even as a teenager. Her earliest pieces of juvenilia come from when she's about 12 years old, so she's somebody who lives and breathes writing. And she wrote first versions of several of her major novels already in her early 20s. Eleanor and Marianne, which would later on become Sense and Sensibility in 1795, First Impressions, which would become Pride and Prejudice in 1796, and Susan, which would become Northanger Abbey in 1798. And some of these novels were published during her life. Sense and Sensibility, Pride and Prejudice, Mansfield Park, and Emma all came out during her life. But her last two novels, Persuasion and Northanger Abbey, were published posthumously by her brother. And she was not all that old when she died. She was 41 years old when she died in 1817. And as for her personal life, we just don't know much. She burned her letters and papers and asked her family and friends to do the same. So she's somebody who wanted to keep that part of her life very private. One of the other details that sometimes shows up when you see these biographical overviews of the author, they tell us that, she accepted a proposal of marriage at one point, but then changed her mind the next day and canceled it. And I'm like, that is really the most germane fact in this life. Why is it that is a fact that seems really important? And I guess it's because, marriage is the crux of so many of her books, like all of her books, I think one way or the other. Not so much, or not only as a romantic entanglement, which it can be, but also as a transaction.
Right.
And so I guess that's why it shows up as like the salient biographical detail.
Yeah, I think many people enjoy these books for the romance aspect of it, and therefore they're curious about the romantic life of the author and how that might relate or rub against it, because of course she's also got a somewhat unexpected, I suppose, take on romance, or certainly not one that every character in her book agrees with.
Yeah, there's a whole range of perspectives, and we'll talk about this in more detail later on, but there are some characters that are all about romantic love, and that's all they care about. Others for whom marriage is clearly a business transaction, and they're fine with that. And others who try to have it both ways, right? To, as they put it, marry for love, but then also do so in a way that's practical and serves the needs of their family.
Yeah. Well, for listeners who haven't picked up the book in a while, do you want to remind them of the basic outlines of the plot?
I will. I always have two minds about this when we're reading something that's a really well-known book. So I'm like, God, everybody knows this plot. But sometimes kind of rehearsing an overview of it gives you a way to give an account that's actually useful even for people who have read it many times. So hopefully this will be one of those. So, it is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife. So, the opening sentence of Pride and Prejudice pretty much says it all. First, the fact that marriage, at least for those of certain social classes, is fundamentally an economic exchange. And second, that it is ridiculous, it is laughable that this is the case. We open with the Bennet family, father, mother, and 5 daughters, at breakfast discussing the single man in possession of a good fortune who has just moved into the neighborhood at Netherfield Park nearby. This is Mr. Bingley, who is in residence with his 2 sisters and a brother-in-law, plus his closest friend, the wealthy but arrogant Mr. Darcy. Mrs. Bennet, the girl's mother, immediately launches into action, trying to land a husband for at least one of her daughters. One good marriage could help the others to have similar success. Mrs. Bennet is a ridiculous character, but she is not wrong about the desperation of the girl's situation. Their home is secure only as long as their father is alive, since after his death the house and property will be inherited by a cousin. This is a comic novel that is also a very high-stakes situation for the Bennet daughters. After various dances and balls take place, and after Elizabeth Bennet, the second daughter and the main character of our story, has turned down an unappealing marriage proposal from one man, her cousin, Mr. Collins, and started a promising flirtation with another man, Mr. Wickham, the Bingley family and Mr. Darcy abruptly go back to London, which leaves Elizabeth's sister Jane very unhappy because she and Mr. Bingley have formed an attachment, of which his sisters and Mr. Darcy both strongly disapprove. Travels to visit family in London for Jane and to visit her friend Charlotte Lucas at Hunsford for Elizabeth follow as the Bennet sisters try to navigate the marriage market. There's a whole lot more plot. This is just the first couple phases, but you will not be surprised, unless you have been living under a rock, to learn that the story all ends happily with multiple weddings and with, as Lizzie Bennet puts it, the happiest, wisest, most reasonable end.
Yeah. I mean, for some of the characters, for sure.
Well, even like the real like wreck characters, like the youngest sister Lydia. I don't know if you enjoyed Lydia as much as I enjoyed Lydia.
Yes, very much enjoyed thinking about Lydia on this read through.
Even Lydia, that wretched teenager hoe, right? She ends up like, in a reasonably stable situation. She's one of the wives of the regiment of officers now. She's not living in the town where she'd like to live, but at least she's in a setting that she clearly found very congenial and enjoyable earlier on in the book, right? So even she lands in a pretty good spot.
I suppose.
I mean, comparatively speaking.
It could have gone worse for her.
It could have gone worse. Yeah, they definitely could have gone worse. The only person who's really miserable is the evil Lady Catherine de Bourgh. And, we're on board with that.
She has her money, after all.
And her blood. Oh, God, I don't even know. This is what I said to myself. I was like making notes. I was like, interesting themes, where to begin. There's so much to say about this book. When I was reading it today, and I've read it like a million times, right? I mean, as a lot of people have. Like sometimes for work purposes, like for teaching purposes, but other times just because like, oh, that's a really good book. And the thing that struck me today and strikes me, I think almost every time I read it, is like the quality of the dialogue. It's so funny. It's so crisp. It's such good dialogue.
Yes.
Characters like, we open up with the breakfast table with Mr. and Mrs. Bennet, and the girls are there, but it's really Mr. and Mrs. Bennet who are talking. And he's dry and surly, and she's, vacuous and ridiculous. And it's just so bubbly. It takes you in such a bubbly kind of way.
It's so sharp. It's so, every not a syllable is wasted,
no,
so to speak.
And when you do get a little bit of exposition, it's tucked after a particularly wonderful passage of dialogue, so you don't mind there being a little exposition because you're just still blissed out from the dialogue that's come previously. So here, for example, they're talking about how Mr. Bingley has moved into town, and Mrs. Bennet says, "It is very likely that he may fall in love with one of them, and therefore you must visit him as soon as he comes." Mr. Bennet says, "I see no occasion for that. You and the girls may go, or you may send them by themselves. Which perhaps will be still better, for you are as handsome as any of them. Mr. Bingley might like you the best of the party." "My dear, you flatter me. I certainly have had my share of beauty, but I do not pretend to be anything extraordinary now. When a woman has 5 grown-up daughters, she ought to give over thinking of her own beauty." It's just, she's ridiculous, right?
Sure.
And that bubbly quality is like kind of incredible. And often will end chapters. And it gives you almost this like comic cliffhangery kind of quality. What did you think about the dialogue? I mean, it comes in different forms, but I think that is really the most striking thing about the surface of the book.
Yeah, no, of course, I agree. It's a sharp and snappy dialogue that really propels you along. It's very Moorish. It's very readable. You want them to keep talking. You can imagine it might do very well adapted for the screen, let's say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and which it has been a million times. Like, we'll probably talk about adaptations later, but like, my God, there are a lot of them.
Yeah, and of course there are. It's incredibly because the dialogue is so prominent, because it's so well done. You don't have to do anything. It's just there. And it's so she has a wonderful ability to have the dialogue mean several things at once, right? There might be 2 different things being meant in one moment, but there might also be a third thing that happens if you know the entire plot, right?
Are you thinking of something in particular? I'm thinking about examples that come to mind too.
I don't have it underlined, but when tedious Mr. Collins proposes to her in a fantastic scene where he is simply not waiting for her to say yes, but just assuming. And when she does say no, is quite, convinced that, she's just being like one of those romantic girls who says no the first time.
Elegant females.
There we go.
He understands that elegant females ordinarily say no at least once. It is usual for young ladies to reject the addresses of a man they secretly mean to accept.
And in response, she says, I do assure you that I am not one of those young ladies, if such young ladies there are, who are so daring as to risk their happiness on the chance of being asked a second time. Mm-hmm. Now, of course, those of us who know the novel realize that she will, in fact, say no to the person that she will end up with and wait to be asked a second time, or at least have the first one, know that it's still on the table before she finally does says yes, that such ladies therefore do exist. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And that she is very much one of them, or she soon will be, though she is also not one of the ones who's going to be doing it to play with somebody's affection in a trivial way, which is what she's claiming right here, right? So, that's such a good line. When you know all the ramifications of her character, it echoes in so many ways. And so much of the dialogue, in particular the dialogue, does that. It just resonates multiply off of these characters.
It's true. It's true. And that's one of the reasons why the book is so rereadable, because like you said, that's a pleasure you only get on a rereading. The first time you read it, you don't get that layer of it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Even this time, I wasn't even thinking about it until later down the road when that happened. And I was like, oh, right.
Yeah. And it's almost the same language, isn't it? When she says to Mr. Collins, you could not make me happy. And I am convinced that I am the last woman in the world who would make you so. It's a very similar line, I think, that appears in her exchange with Mr. Darcy later, the first marriage proposal, right?
Yes. And there also you've got the, I'm convinced I'm the last woman in the world who could make you so, to make you happy, which kind of means something slightly different than what he's going to hear it as, right?
Yes.
And so you've got that double play as well.
Well, exactly. And this, is very much in keeping with something you see with a whole number of characters that are ridiculous. And when I say they're ridiculous, I mean they're literally people who are laughed at by others, whether they're laughing out loud or sort of, in their mind kind of laughing. It's something you see in the exchange of Mr. and Mrs. Bennet in the very first chapter over the breakfast table. He's clearly making fun of her and he's letting her kind of expose herself. And then when Mr. Bennet is eagerly waiting for his cousin, Mr. Collins, to come visit, he's hopeful that it will be, based on the ridiculous quality of the letter that Mr. Collins has sent, he's expecting that the visit will be similarly amusing, right? Not because Mr. Collins intends to be amusing, but because he's a ridiculous person.
Right.
And so there's this kind of dynamic in the book where there's a certain number of characters who are laughed at and a certain number of characters who laugh at them, right? And to some extent, how can I put it? There's some reciprocity. There's a moment when I think it's Mr. Bennet says to his daughter, he says to Elizabeth, he says, what do we exist for but to make sport for our fellows and let them, and laugh at one another in our turn, something like that.
Yes, which is a line that I picked up on the first time I read the book and was a quote that I kept in my back pocket, let's say. I loved that line.
It is a great line. But so there's a certain kind of reciprocity. It's good humored, expecting that people will laugh at you and you'll laugh at them. But there's also people who are just the butt of jokes and never are in a position to laugh at others, like Mrs. Bennet, like Mr. Collins, like Lady Catherine, right? And not that we feel bad for them. We kind of enjoy laughing at them. But there's this, I don't know what to call it, like this asymmetry in terms of people who are knowledgeable and can laugh at others and people who don't even know what they're doing that's ridiculous.
Yeah, it's something I was thinking a lot about when I was reading it this time, which is if there's any humanity or depth given to those characters, right? By which I mean, are they just laughingstocks or is there something to it? Mrs. Bennet, having 5 daughters who are unmarried and have no clear future. If Mr. Bennet dies, they could be easily kicked out of their home and they will have some money to live off, but significantly less than they're accustomed to. And she has a real worry there that most of the daughters are not taking seriously, which perhaps they should a little bit in a sense, if you know what I mean. Like there's a sense that she feels that there's a real danger to their situation, which they are teenagers and laughing at. Mm-hmm. Nothing bad will ever really happen to us. Mm-hmm. And while she goes about it in ridiculous ways and while she sort of makes a fool of herself in social gatherings because of her lack of propriety in some situations, or her willingness to speak her mind and show how unthoroughly she's thought over the situation. Nevertheless, like, she's not as wild as she seems in terms of her concerns.
Yeah, no, she's not wrong, right? This is a real crisis. Like, she does need to try to get at least one of them settled because, like, even just thinking about her own personal welfare, if all 5 of the girls either don't marry or marry in a very poor kind of way, what's going to happen to her? Like, there's no, like, there's no safety net out there, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, they will be making some money.
Yeah. But I guess the idea is that, like, they won't live the lives they've lived up till now. They would live very different kinds of lives.
It would be a major change and upheaval to their lives. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
And so, even though, yes, she's ridiculous, like, part of it is like, well, she's the one who's paying attention to a large scale problem.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. And Mr. Collins is a tedious sycophant in his way, but he's not as awful as some of the other people that we meet in the book.
Well, this is, yeah. And like, he's like kind of motivated in an ethical way. I mean, the reason he's coming to try to marry one of the daughters is because he knows that he's the person who's in the entail. In other words, Mr. Bennet's house and property goes to the next male relative, which is his cousin, Mr. Collins. And so that's why the girls would be out in the cold. So he's like, well, to make it up to them, like, maybe I'll marry one of them. And then at least, the family's welfare is assured. So there's that. But then also, I was just noticing this time when I was reading this really interesting passage that describes Mr. Collins. It happens right at the beginning of chapter 15. And it kind of gives us both it shows us his ridiculous side, but it's more compassionate than I would have expected. So he says this: Mr. Collins was not a sensible man, and the deficiency of nature had been but little assisted by education or society, the greatest part of his life having been spent under the guidance of an illiterate and miserly father. And though he belonged to one of the universities, he'd merely kept the necessary terms without forming at it any useful acquaintance. The subjection in which his father had brought him up had given him originally great humility of manner, but it was now a good deal counteracted by the self-conceit of a weak head, living in retirement, and the consequential feelings of early and unexpected prosperity.
Mm.
So it's a really interesting passage because it's not that it's positive in its description of him, like it shows all the bad qualities, but he's got this awful father, the illiterate and miserly father, who had brought him up in subjection.
Right.
It's interesting, isn't it? It's like more nuanced than I remembered.
Yeah, I think a lot of the adaptations really underline how comic he is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And he is. Like, he's definitely meant to be comic.
Oh,
but
yeah.
there is perhaps a bit more to him than most of the portrayals have allowed us to see. And the fact that, he marries, after Elizabeth turns him down, he marries Elizabeth's good friend, Charlotte Lucas. And she's like, well, look, I'm not looking for romance. And that's just not a thing I'm into. And this is a good chance for me to get a stable income. And when you get married, you have no idea whether it's going to work out or not. Because how long have these people known each other? How deeply do they know each other? Have they lived together? No, that would be completely forbidden. So, you don't know. You don't know what you're getting until you get there. And, and indeed, when she gets there, it's not brilliant, but she's able to make a go of it. And it's a happier outcome than some that she could have had.
Absolutely. Remember how she's 27 years old.
She's 27 already. Wow.
She is. I know, right? like, is that old? In the economy of marriage in this book, it is old.
Well, that's older than any of the Bennett girls.
That's right. That's exactly right. So it's really interesting. The Bennett girls are all like at one point, Elizabeth describes herself when she's asked by Lady Catherine de Bourgh, she says she's not 1 in 20. So she's under 21, right?
Yeah.
And Jane is presumably like a year, maybe 2 years older, right? So they're all in the marriage market, window. And Charlotte is kind of on the farther end. And she's such an interesting foil for the Bennett sisters, right? Because she's best friends with Elizabeth. So they're very, very close, so much so that Elizabeth's absolutely freaked out by Charlotte's clear-headed decision-making around the marriage market. But she's positioned slightly differently. And like you said, she's got different expectations and a different outlook.
Yeah.
She's such an interesting character.
She serves the really interesting function in that sequence that you just described of Elizabeth's reaction to Charlotte actually marrying this man. Oh my God, why would you? Why would anybody? I didn't, therefore why would anyone?
Yeah, she's like, what are you doing, right?
Exactly. And really shows up that thing, which Jane, her sister, comments upon directly about how, well, Elizabeth, you simply have to understand that different people are in different situations and have different priorities.
Mm-hmm.
And, he's not so awful that no one could find him a worthy mate or marriage partner. And therefore, maybe Charlotte knows what she's doing. Why don't you listen to her a little harsher?
Mm-hmm. One of the things I was really struck by is, even before the conversation that Elizabeth and Charlotte have about Charlotte accepting Mr. Collins, there's a kind of little passage where the narrator's talking about Charlotte's perspective. It's one of these relatively uncommon moments where the narrator is giving us a sense of what somebody's thinking when it's not one of the main characters. Right? It's not Elizabeth, right? And this is in chapter 22, and it's describing the different members of the Lucas family's perspective on this, right? Charlotte was tolerably composed. She had gained her point and had time to consider of it. Her reflections were in general satisfactory. Mr. Collins, to be sure, was neither sensible nor agreeable. His society was irksome, and his attachment to her must be imaginary. But still he would be her husband. Without thinking highly either of men or of matrimony, marriage had always been her object. It was the only honorable provision for well-educated young women of small fortune, and however uncertain of giving happiness, must be their pleasantest preservative from want. This preservative she had now obtained, and at the age of 27, without having ever been handsome, she felt all the good luck of it. It's so cold. It's so cold. But it's not, she's not wrong.
She's not wrong. I mean, that is a reasonable way to go about your life.
And it totally shows, it's like I promise I'll leave Charlotte alone in a minute, but I just think it's such an interesting character. It also makes clear where she's coming from way early in the book when she's talking to Elizabeth about Jane. Now, Jane has got this kind of, I guess, flirtation, this acquaintance that's developing with Mr. Bingley. And Charlotte is talking with Elizabeth saying, Jane better make it clear how she feels. She says, if a woman conceals her affection, she may lose the opportunity of fixing him. And then it will be but poor consolation to believe the world equally in the dark. We can all begin freely. A slight preference is natural enough, but there are very few of us who have heart enough to be really in love without encouragement. In 9 cases out of 10, a woman had better show more affection than she feels. Bingley likes your sister undoubtedly, but he may never do more than like her if she does not help him on.
Right.
Right. And so he's like, he says, when Jane is secure of him, there'll be leisure for falling in love as much as she chooses. Cold.
Cold, but also this is another piece of dialogue that works in two ways, right? It shows how Charlotte thinks about this thing. It's very transactional. It's very much like, if you want to get married, you have to do this to land him, and then you can worry about what's going to happen later in life. Mm-hmm. So that's one thing. Like, it's a very calculated approach. It shows Charlotte's very different approach from Elizabeth's in terms of how you go about a marriage. But also, one of the things that's going to be proving an impediment in Bingley accepting Jane is the fact that she is not demonstrative enough. No. And so Darcy and his sisters are able to say, she's just not that into you. Mm-hmm. Don't make a fool of yourself by proposing to her, which
shows that Charlotte was absolutely right. Yeah.
Yeah. So Charlotte's right. And so there's this other level that you don't find out about until much later in the book towards what's going on in that moment, which is delightful.
And I think that's why the fantasy of this book is so powerful, because we're at one and the same time living in an utterly pragmatic world where we know about the transactions. We know what people have to do, what trade-offs have to be made. And it's saying, and yet even in that world, this wonderful kind of emotional thing can happen, And so we at one and the same time, we're like, on one level, we know that's, probably not true, right? but it is so pretty to think so.
So one of the things that I was thinking about on this reading, and especially after that discussion that we just talked about between Elizabeth and Jane about how she should respond to Charlotte, clearly Jane is like the better person of the two sisters.
Well, she's much nicer.
She's much nicer. She's much prettier. She's much more level-headed when she deals with other people. Like she's looking for the complications. She's not as quick to a judgment, mm-hmm. as to prejudice, I suppose, as Elizabeth is. There's a lot to go for her. But obviously, Elizabeth is the more interesting of the two because she is so vivacious and because she's so quick to words that sound witty, even if they're not necessarily the most carefully thought out, even though, she's very smart and she's very observant, but she's quick to decide something and act upon it. and reluctant to show as much faith in sort of a base humanity as her older sister is. And similarly, if you look at Bingley and Darcy, clearly Bingley's kind of the better person in a sense, because he's also very open and caring and is always looking for the best in people. Obviously, like a good match for Jane in that sense. And Darcy, who is brooding and
arrogant.
A bit arrogant, yes, and so forth, is
rude.
Clearly he can be very rude. He can be very moralistic at times. He can be very impatient, but also is clearly the more interesting. He's clearly more interesting than Bingley. Like you want to read the story of Elizabeth and Darcy much more than you want to read the story of Jane and Bingley, even though Jane and Bingley are probably the two people you like. I don't know. They're better people in that sense.
Yeah. They're much lower pressure. Well, yeah, no, it's interesting because I always think about it with the Bennet daughters, right? Like Jane is the eldest and she's got this one sort of extreme of personality where she's, as you were just saying, she's sweet, she's nice, she's kind of like low key, like, you know what I mean? She's got the stability to her kind of almost.
Sure.
And then the youngest daughter, Lydia, is just wild, you know,
yes.
she's impulsive and putting herself in the middle of things. And like, you know, she said a thought comes in her head and she says it, you know, but funnily enough, one of the things that makes Elizabeth interesting, as you were just putting it, is that she has a little bit of a Lydia-like qualities in her as well. Like there's this one scene where she, when Jane has gone over to visit the Bingley sisters over at Netherfield, and she gets a cold and she has to stay there for a little bit longer. Elizabeth's worried about Jane, and so she is going to go over there to visit her, but the horses aren't available, so she walks. And when she walks over there, she's kind of a mess. Like she gets all muddy and all disheveled and so on. And it describes her this way. This is in chapter 7. Elizabeth continued her walk alone, crossing field after field at a quick pace, jumping over stiles and springing over puddles with impatient activity, and gets to the house. And she's shown into the breakfast parlor. That she should have walked 3 miles so early in the day in such dirty weather and by herself was almost incredible to Mrs. Hurst and Miss Bingley, and Elizabeth was convinced that they held her in contempt for it. It's a funny thing happens in that scene because the initial description of what's happened, like how she's gotten all muddy, is kind of eclipsed by the snooty response of the Bingley sisters, you know, who are like, ooh, you know, contempt. Oh, how would you do this, right? And so we see those sisters, you know, as like bad characters, right? So we're dismissive of their perspective on Elizabeth. But in fact, what she's done is kind of like, you know, I mean, it's not quite Lydia-like, but it's like, is a little, you know, off the, like Jane would never do this.
Jane would probably find a more measured way of getting there. Yes.
Jane would find a way to get there without getting all muddy. Right. And it's just interesting because like what it is that makes a character engaging, right, in the way that Elizabeth Bennet is the badness. I don't know if badness is the right word, but you know what I mean? If you're really, really sweet and good, you're Jane. And even Elizabeth says, oh, Jane, you're so sweet and good. You know, you don't, you know, nobody deserves you. You're so great. But that's boring. as anybody knows who's read, you know, Milton's Paradise Regained, right? Like heaven is really boring.
Yes, or Dante's Paradise. Yes.
Yeah, no, right? And so and I just find that part of it to be kind of fascinating, how that works.
Yeah, exactly. I'm also fascinated about that because, of course, Jane has the same name as the author.
Mm.
I don't know what to make of that.
Yeah.
I'm sure somebody said something about it, but it's an odd choice to make. To give your name, although, you know, I guess it was published anonymously, but still to give your name to the character who's not the main character, but is in some ways better than the main character, like morally, or in terms of, you know, who you might want to aspire to ideally. I don't know. Obviously, you can aspire to whoever you want to aspire to. Long live those who aspire to be Lydia. But
yeah, right. Well, you know, people who write about Austen do sometimes talk about her very close relationship with her sister Cassandra.
Right.
And so, like, not to get all like biographical analysis. It is interesting when you think about the relationships in this book. There are a whole lot of different relationships. The relationship between Jane and Elizabeth is actually a very interesting one. Like they're clearly very, very intimate. Like they're together in all these like, you know, I don't know, like talking to each other in the privacy of the bedroom or telling each other things that only the other person knows. And, I mean, that's consistent with a sibling relationship, but it's a very intimate sibling relationship. And it's clear that in the whole family, like that is the closest relationship in the Bennett family, is those two sisters.
Of course, yeah. Yeah. And I think that's one of the appealing things why some people might come back to this, because of course that is a very, loving and caring relationship that it's very sweet to read about. It's lovely how they confide in each other and how they, can also correct each other in small ways.
Yeah. And, like thinking ahead to the very end of the book, like, I mentioned the book ends with marriages, in this sort of Shakespeare comedies kind of way. They both get married at the end of the book. And there's that kind of, I don't know, almost like, I don't know, saying too much twin-like quality in their fates. It's clear that they're going to stay very close because their husbands are besties, right?
Yes. Yes, how convenient.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's part of the fantasy, and that's one of the things that I think is endlessly fascinating about this book. It's in some ways a very realistic and clear-headed and cold view of the world, like the economic marriage market. But it's also like this utterly hopeful fantasy. And it's as if those two things could coexist.
One of the things that I was noticing while I was reading it this time, having just read Wuthering Heights, Wuthering Heights, you might remember, I mentioned, is really obsessive about dates and like when everybody was born, how old everybody is, how they all sort of connect that way. Mm-hmm. And Pride and Prejudice is, perhaps unsurprisingly, really obsessed about income and how much each person makes. We learn this. This is talked about quite. I think the first thing we learned about Bingley,
$5,000 a year,
$5,000 a year, and then we meet Darcy, and it's like he's got 10,000 or more, which is a lot. Of course, it's much higher than the Bennets are, even though the Bennets are make a lot. They have an income. It's fine, but significantly lower. It's fine, but like there's so much obsessive interest in that.
Mm-hmm. And later than the buying of Wickham's commission and all that stuff, there's a lot of money in this book.
There's a lot of money. And it's interesting that like part of Elizabeth's charm, or certainly one of the things that she's going by, is that she doesn't, for the most part, care about that. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Like she's just ignoring that aspect of her reality, which is pervading so much of the rest of society. Mm-hmm. And it's hard to tell how we're supposed to read that, I suppose. Like there's an obvious trope, I suppose, that like, don't worry about money, love conquers all kind of thing. And that doesn't quite feel like what the book is about, but
I think the book is very sneaky on this point.
Yeah.
I think the book is very, very sneaky on this point. Because like you said, you're absolutely right. She's just going through life like it will all work out.
Yeah.
As opposed to Jane, who really is mindful that somebody's got to marry well, like somebody's got to think about the family. Like she knows this,
Yes.
She'd like to marry for love, but she like understands the situation.
She's not manic about it like her mother is, but she understands that she's very grounded because Jane is very grounded.
Mm-hmm. And Elizabeth just seems to like go on not thinking about this, but it's so interesting the way that Pemberley shows up, the magnificent estate that Mr. Darcy has. So like there's this lovely kind of, I don't want to call it a cliffhanger, but this pointing toward Pemberley that happens at the end of like book 2. The novel's divided into books, right? So at the end of book 2, it's like they're planning to go to Pemberley. To Pemberley, therefore, they were to go. And this sort of sets us up to be all like, wow, what's that going to be like? And so they go and they see Pemberley. And this is from the beginning of chapter 1 in book 3. She's in a carriage together with her aunt and uncle, the gardeners. And it says, Elizabeth saw and admired every remarkable spot and point of view. They gradually ascended for half a mile and then found themselves at the top of a considerable eminence, where the wood ceased, and the eye was instantly caught by Pemberley House, situated on the opposite side of a valley, into which the road with some abruptness wound. It was a large, handsome stone building, standing well on rising ground and backed by a ridge of high woody hills, and in front a stream of some natural importance was swelled into greater, but without any artificial appearance. Its banks were neither formal nor falsely adorned. Elizabeth was delighted. She had never seen a place for which nature had done more, or where natural beauty had been so little counteracted by an awkward taste. They were all of them warm in their admiration, and at that moment she felt that to be mistress of Pemberley might be something. And then later at the end, she's talking to Jane, and Jane is like, when did you know? When did you know? And she's like, oh, I think I can date it to when I first saw his beautiful grounds at Pemberley.
Yes.
And they're teasing, right? They're joking, but like, I don't know. What's going on there?
So I treated myself after finishing the book, and I started rewatching the 1995 BBC Colin Firth adaptation of it. And one of the things I haven't seen it in decades, but one of the things I do remember of it quite well, and I just watched it, a few hours ago, is the reveal shot of Pemberley, which is magnificent. You have there is nothing quite so like, whoa, 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 as when Pemberley peeks out from behind the woods, and it's gorgeous and it's stunning. And it's like, yeah, they do a great job with that scene, as they do with many scenes. It's a fantastic adaptation. But that moment of like, oh, this is Pemberley. This is what I said no to. Oh, dear.
Very nice. I know, right?
And she's not wrong to melt a little bit when she sees it.
Yeah, you mentioned the 1995 adaptation. They do something really clever. I think they do a number of clever things, but one thing they do that's really clever is, you'll remember probably, that the 1995 adaptation also inserts a little scene that's not in the book where Elizabeth stumbles on Darcy, where he's been like swimming in a little like watering hole after coming back from hunting or something, or riding or whatever.
Oh, yes.
And right, it's like, whoa, Mr. Darcy with your wet shirt on.
Mr.
Barely.
Darcy wearing a white shirt that is wet and sticking to him and allowing nipple to be seen through it.
Yes,
it is remarkable. I actually remember that so well that I embellished a memory. I remember that there was a shot of him emerging from the water, and that's how she sees him. That's not what happens, but like that's basically what happens.
It's a beautiful thought. No, I mean, it's great scene, but also it's a double to the Pemberley reveal.
Right.
Like, in other words, there's an erotics of the house.
Oh,
right?
Yes.
Because the house awakens the desire, right? And that's why in the adaptation, I think they have that scene soon after.
I think so. I mean, absolutely. But like, nothing against Colin Firth, but that house, my God, that's the erotic scene.
100%. So anyway, so I'm not saying that she's just like, oh, I want money, but there's something there. There's something incredibly desirable to be the mistress of that.
Well, I think also it's not even that yes, it's expensive and it's fancy, but it's also like beautiful and well maintained and well considered. There's a sequence when they're touring the house before Mr. Darcy is there. She's touring it with her aunt and uncle. And it's like, look, every window has a different view onto the property, but all of the views are lovely. It feels like there was so much intent put into this house to make it lovely and nice and thoughtful and considerate, which is the thing that she's always thought Darcy wasn't, but is learning that he actually very much is.
Yeah, absolutely. They're hearing this from the housekeeper who's talking about how benevolent he is. And she mentions a particular detail of a room he's had fixed up for his sister because he's always looking for something that he can do to please her.
Right.
Right. And so, like you said, the house kind of is revealing Mr. Darcy to Elizabeth and to her family. And it even literally, like, they see a little miniature on ivory that's Mr. Darcy. And then later on in one of the galleries, Elizabeth sees a portrait of him. So it's weird, like she sees him there more clearly than she does in person.
Yeah. It's such a tightly well constructed book.
Beautifully constructed.
I was reading something that suggested that Jane Austen kind of regretted that it was quite so tight and compact, that she sort of wished she'd incorporated a chapter. Basically, she wanted to put in a chapter about, whales or something.
Well, all books would be improved with a chapter on whales, let me just say.
Exactly. She very much wanted to have a little bit more of that in it to give it a little bit more air, but it is, brilliantly tight. Yeah,
no, it is. And I think, maybe, we've talked about adaptations a little bit. I think it's one of the reasons why it opens itself up so well to adaptations. It's got all this potentiality in it. Like, I'm not saying it's a problem that potentiality is not unpacked. It's so tightly constructed that there's all this additional stuff that could be folded out of it. And some of the adaptations do a really good job of unfolding that.
Is there one in particular that you're thinking of? I mean, the 95 one that I've already mentioned is, fantastic and pretty faithful to the text.
That is a good one. Did you ever see there's one that came out, I think it's 2005, the Keira Knightley one. Did you see that?
No,
I tried to watch it. It looked awful. I couldn't do it.
No, my co-host on my other podcast, Charlotte, is a devoted watcher of Pride and Prejudice adaptations.
Ah.
And so if I find out about a new one, I will run it past her. I found out about one that came out a few years ago called Fire Island.
Oh, I don't know that.
Well, it takes place on Fire Island. It stars Bowen Yang and Margaret Cho. It is wildly an adaptation, like sort of like Clueless was for Emma, I suppose. I mean, I haven't seen it yet, but obviously taking the setting and putting it into the gay culture on Fire Island, and
Interesting.
Margaret Cho plays Mr. and Mrs. Bennett, or a character that is, mapping both of them onto it. That sounds like an amazing choice. I don't know. It sounds interesting. I haven't seen it, though.
That does sound interesting. I went back and looked to see what the history of adaptations, looks like. And I was picking out a few little plums from the pudding. There was apparently a TV adaptation in 1938. Which kind of seems weird.
A TV adaptation?
That's what it said.
There wasn't TV then.
I don't know what it was exactly. But it was some kind of live, broadcast thing. Let me see if I can find it. Hang on, let me just find it really quickly. Oh, it was! I swear to God, it's a lost television broadcast. I did not. I mean, I'm trusting Wikipedia here. But,
it is.
I guess they were just broadcasting
live. The BBC started broadcasting TV.
Yeah, isn't that crazy? So I had no idea that this was the case, but. So it is, but it's lost. So alas, we will never know more. There's a new one coming out next year that's in production right now from Netflix. We'll have to see what that's like. But there's some really interesting ones out there. Like, did you ever see Bride and Prejudice by Gurudh Chadha?
No, but Charlotte strongly recommends this one.
Yes, subtitled The Bollywood Musical. It's actually really fun. I would love to talk about it sometime because the music's great. Visually, it's really enjoyable. The guy who plays Darcy is not at all hot.
Oh. That's a choice.
Which I see as a problem. I see as a problem in driving the narrative. But, so it goes. But otherwise, it's a really fun movie. The Bridget Jones oeuvre, of course, is in a way a kind of a response to Pride and Prejudice, definitely.
Okay.
Right? Because, Mark Darcy and
sure. I haven't seen it.
It totally is. I mean, it's just in a very loose way. This is Clueless as Emma. That's the sense in which Bridget Jones is kind of doing Pride and Prejudice.
Right.
There is apparently a book that came out in 2009 called Pride and Prejudice and Zombies. I have not seen this. Have you read this?
All right. So here's a story. So I was in grad school then when it came out, and it came out. There's a big, this is a very silly tangent. There's a big medieval conference that happens in Kalamazoo, Michigan every year. And because we're at the University of Toronto and it's an easy 6-hour drive to get down there, a lot of us would go and we'd pack the car and so forth. One year as we were going, Pride and Prejudice and Zombies had just come out. And it seemed like such a wild idea to take the text of Pride and Prejudice and just interpolate passages every so often that involved zombie hunting. It was like, what a fun idea. What a weird idea. And I thought I would pick it up and I would read it to the people in the car to help make the drive a little bit more fun and silly. And I went to the bookstore all excited to buy it. And I just poked my nose into it and started reading it. And I thought it was very poorly done indeed. Thing is, Jane Austen writes really well on a sentence by sentence level, of course. So all the reviews I was seeing beforehand were like, oh, it's flawless. Oh, it captures the tone perfectly. No, it does not. And no, it's simply not. So I don't know.
It's a lovely idea.
It's been very popular. And I think they made a movie or something out of it, and sequels. But it didn't work for me. I don't know. Listeners, if you like it, feel free to write in to convince you that I should give it another try. Happy to hear that.
I also ran across a very dirty adaptation by a person called Anne Herndon called Pride/Prejudice that came out in 2010. And I will just read you a couple sentences from the back cover. For readers who've loved Pride and Prejudice, questions have always remained. What is the real nature of Darcy's intense friendship with Charles Bingley? What is the disturbing history behind Darcy's tortured relationship with his foster brother, George Wickham? And what other intimacies, besides their cherished friendship, are exchanged between Elizabeth and Charlotte Lucas? And then at the bottom it says, Pride, Prejudice brings to light all the buried secrets, potential scandals, and unspoken forbidden loves of Austen's story. Which is silly, I know, but I think it's kind of interesting in connection with what we were talking about earlier, this potentiality. There's a lot of energy, a lot of emotional energy in the book. And this was just a book that was and what if all of that was expressed sexually? You know what I mean?
I'm sure there's plenty of Pride and Prejudice fanfic out there.
There's got to be tons.
I haven't gone looking, but there simply must be. Those are valid questions that we've all thought about at some point or another.
But it's so interesting. In other words, what it's doing is it's kind of demonstrating what is visible and not visible. You know what I mean? In the book, you kind of know is there, but is not explicit. And I'm not saying these characters are all actually having sex with each other, but there's a lot of emotion in this book.
Well, this is actually one of the things that I was thinking about on this reading, because I was thinking a lot about Lydia, who's fantastic. And Lydia at one point runs off with somebody, and the idea is, oh no, they've run off to elope and Lydia's so young and he's a scoundrel and this is terrible and we must, what was she thinking? But it turns out that like they actually weren't planning to get married.
No, they just shacked up.
They just shacked up. And the implication, I assume, is that they're having sex. That never gets said, of course.
No,
but that's the only thing
clear.
you're supposed to read from that situation. And certainly, like, Lydia is vivacious enough that you'd think, yeah, that's on the table.
Yeah. And this is the thing, right? That's one of the reasons why I think Lydia is such an important character is it's not that Lydia is the only one who wants to have sex all the time. She's the one who, like I said, a thought comes in her head and she says it. She has an appetite. She satisfies it, right? She just does it. And all these other people, and I think we're meant to think this especially about Elizabeth, also have these impulses and these appetites.
Sure.
But what you can do, the line, right, is observed by these people. And that's where the potentiality, I think, comes. Right? That's one of the things that's so energizing about the novel.
Of course. But if we heard Lydia's novel, and I'm sure somebody has written this, but if we heard Lydia's novel, Lydia's take on the story, like she was having a good thing. She found somebody, she ran off. They were having a fun time. Then she was forced to get married and she made the best of it. She's very smug about being the first of the daughters to get married. And then we find out in the final chapter when they're sort of, where are they nowing everybody? Like that they got bored with each other pretty quickly. And like, fair, but now they're married. And like, there's a world in which Lydia maybe could have gone off and had other fun adventures with other officers of the regiment and whatnot.
Yeah. Well, you get the sense that they're a couple more or less like Mr. and Mrs. Bennet now.
Sure. Yes. And that's sort of made explicit because Mrs. Bennet thinks of herself or thinks of Lydia as like a younger version of her. She also was quite fond of the officers. And she also sort of, married somebody that she thought was a fun time and then grew up and was not as excited by him or him by her.
Yeah, there's one really poignant moment when Lizzie's talking to her father, she's talking to Mr. Bennet about whether or not to marry Mr. Darcy. And he thinks that Mr. Darcy is terrible because of earlier things that had happened. And so she's like, no, I actually do want to marry him. And he says, Lizzie, what are you about? Let me not see you in the position of being unable to respect your partner in life.
Yes. Yes.
And like you said, the second level, because what he's saying is like, I hate my wife. Please don't do this to yourself.
Yeah, Mr. Bennet is a fascinating character because he just wants to stay in his room and read books.
You just leave me alone.
Just leave me alone.
I know.
I have one daughter who I'm very fond of and another one who is sensible. And then I have these 3 nonsense daughters and a nonsense wife, and I want nothing to do with them. Though it also, I also get the feeling occasionally that he does kind of like being around these ridiculous creatures. They're like wild cats living in his house.
Small doses, right?
Yeah, doses. Yeah. He doesn't respect them, but he does seem to take some pleasure from their silliness.
There's one scene where he's around and then he withdraws, fatigued by the raptures of his wife.
Exactly. Oh boy. And speaking of thinking about how this book would be different if it was from other characters' perspectives, there's a whole angle in this book or subplot where they're trying to find Lydia, right? Lydia and Wickham have run off and where are they? And then, the father and the uncle and Darcy all go off to look for them. And there's a procedural aspect where you get hints of how they did it, how they found them, who they went to, how they put clues together, how they discovered them, and then how they convinced them to do the right thing. And that is an interesting story, but that is a masculine sphere story, right? Only the men would engage in that sort of thing, it would seem. And so we hear about it secondhand.
Through letters, especially.
Exactly, through the many, many letters in this book. And we hear all about it very much like the Shakespeare scenes that are, all the action happened off screen and now I'm going to tell you about it, but we don't actually get to see it. And I don't know, I guess there's something really interesting about that sort of gendered moment where we don't get a procedural both because that's not the novel we're reading right now, but also because Elizabeth can't be clever in that way. You know what I mean?
No, she can't be touching that world. And you're right, it's gendered, that divide, but also it's, I think, urban versus the country, right? Because they have to find them in the city, right? And that's where the gardeners live, right? They live in the city, but they're kind of almost like, I don't know, it's almost like a little island or something. Like they're in the city, but not of the city, if you see what I mean, right? And he's able to navigate that world, right? And as you say, the women, especially Elizabeth, right? They it's like improper for them to kind of touch on that world.
Yeah. So I guess that's the other thing about the sort of potentiality you were saying. Like, not only are there a lot of relationships and so forth, but there's even, just in terms of the abundant amount of plot, there's whole aspects of the plot that could have been their own novel.
Absolutely. Like, and the gardeners too, like more generally, there seems like there's a whole like vista of plot over there that we never quite get, but it seems like there's something there.
What a book.
What a book.
You must be aware that when a young lady is, by whatever means, introduced into a dwelling of this kind, she is always lodged apart from the rest of the family. While they snugly repair to their own end of the house, she is formally conducted by Dorothy, the ancient housekeeper, up a different staircase and along many gloomy passages into an apartment never used since some cousin or kin died in it about 20 years before. Can you stand such a ceremony as this? Will not your mind misgive you when you find yourself in this gloomy chamber, too lofty and extensive for you, with only the feeble rays of a single lamp to take in its size, its walls hung with tapestry exhibiting figures as large as life, and the bed of dark green stuff or purple velvet, presenting even a funereal appearance? Will not your heart sink within you? Northanger Abbey is one of two of Jane Austen's novels that was published posthumously. It is one of the novels that she worked on early in her life, as Susan, as you said, early.
Mm-hmm.
And it's her silliest novel by a fairly wide stretch. I mean, not the funniest necessarily, because Pride and Prejudice is fantastically funny, but Northanger Abbey is the silliest of her novels. And it has always had a very special place in my heart because of that silliness. I don't know. It's not many people's favorite, but what have you thought of Northanger Abbey?
It's kind of interesting. I don't know if I mentioned this to you before. I really like Austen, right? But it's the one of her books that I've tried to read like 4 different times. And I kind of bounce off it a little bit. And I don't know if it's because of that, the kind of Gothic novel satire thing that's going on in it. And I just don't know that literature well enough to enjoy what she's doing there. And I read part of it. I read like maybe the first quarter of it, maybe. And it's also a little I mean, maybe it's part of it is reading it after Pride and Prejudice, right? It's a little bit clunkier,
Sure.
And I
Yeah.
think
Anything is.
and if I'm not mistaken, there's like debate about how much she revised it because it was published posthumously. So as opposed to the one she published in her lifetime, it's kind of hard to know had she done what she wanted to do with it,
Right.
and how much of it is still kind of the youthful draft, and how much of it is stuff that she'd really worked in a way that she was satisfied by.
It certainly feels like a more youthful work.
Mm-hmm.
It is definitely not as polished as Pride and Prejudice or Emma or any of her other books that were published during her lifetime, certainly. And yet, there is some charm to that, for me at least. Absolutely.
When did you first read it? Did you read it like a long time ago the first time?
Yeah, I read all of her books when I was in my early 20s, let's say.
Uh-huh.
And this was just the one that jumped out at me. There's actually 2 reasons. One of it is that it is very silly and over the top. And I also did not know the Gothic literature that it was referring to, because it is very much a satire of it. Catherine Morland, who is our heroine, is 17 and her head is filled with Gothic novels.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll go into the plot a little bit, I guess. She is brought by some rich family friends to Bath, where she meets Isabella and John Thorpe, 2 characters who are very desperate for a wealthy connection because they're in a rough place themselves, and who are very manipulative because of that. But she also meets Eleanor and Henry Tilney, a brother and sister, who are much more clever and kind-hearted and wealthy, of course.
Mm.
And so then we get all these different angles, right? So John Thorpe pursues Catherine, but he's tedious and she doesn't want him. Isabella's pursuing Catherine's brother James, and that's going much better. But then she sees a more likely prospect who's probably going to get her more money, so she goes for that. Catherine falls for Henry Tilney, but John and Isabella, seeing this, try to scupper it, just try to like feed all sorts of bad information and tear her away and make her look terrible. So, there's all this kind of plot going on. And then eventually, Catherine manages to be invited by the Tilneys and brought to their estate of Northanger Abbey in Gloucestershire, which she expects is going to be like this very scary place that is full of intrigue and terrors, and it's simply not. But, her mind has built this up. Like that thing, the quote that I just read is what Henry Tilney is telling her as they're heading to the estate, as he's trying to get her in the right mood to get there, because he also loves these Gothic novels and is fully aware of all the tropes and exactly understands what she's hoping and expecting to get out of this situation. And so he's having a bit of fun with her.
Just like there's this imaginary world of books, right? That kind of shapes how you see the real world before you.
Absolutely. And the book is very much full of that, right? That's sort of the other thing I love about this book, is that it is a meta commentary. It's a book about people who are living in books and whose living in books thoroughly changes how they view the world and their expectations in the world. And, she's reading these Gothic novels like The Mysteries of Udolpho, this novel that had come out in 1794 by Anne Radcliffe, which was a huge success and is full of, this strange castle of Udolpho, which has all sorts of terrible, creepy things inside of it. Catherine reads the book during the course of the book, she's reading the book, and all these expectations are influencing her. So we get to see this sort of double play on it. And we also get to see the kinds of horrors she expects because of the literature that she's reading, mysterious deaths and terrible, abductions and terrible things that are happening to young girls like herself. So that's what every moment is for her. And then the horrors that she actually goes through in the book are quite different.
Yeah, one of the things that I was really struck by, because I read some of the opening and then I read some of the sections just to sort of give a sense of like how the book goes, like what the high points are, right? And it struck me as such a weird juxtaposition between the horrors that she thinks that house has. Like she thinks there's this kind of story of a murder that must have taken place there and that maybe the general killed his wife and stuff like that. So she imagines there's this horror at the heart of it. But what there actually is something quite different. This like oppressive patriarchal fist kind of, which is going to be what sends her away from the house in that really abrupt way. Because that's the greatest physical danger to her in that whole book, right? Is when she gets expelled from the house abruptly and sent out on her own. And would have been without the money to get home unless Eleanor had helped her out, right?
Exactly. Well, physical danger, yes. But that's not what she mainly experiences. She's mostly experiencing strange emotional terrors. Isabella and John Thorpe are constantly gaslighting her, foisting her away. They're like, oh, you're supposed to hang out with your friend Eleanor, but wouldn't it be better? Oh, we're just going to a drive out of town. We're going to go visit the countryside and we're going to go see this castle. So you want to come with us because you love castles. And actually we saw Isabella on our way over here and they're totally busy today. It turns out they had something come up. So they're not going to have this thing anyways. All of this is lies. Like she's constantly being lied to by these people who she thinks are her friends. And then she realizes that like she comes off as a person who's been rude to the people that she wants to know the best. And like social horror is what is happening to Catherine in this book, which is such a fascinating twist on the horror of the Gothic novels. And it's something that there's a similar sequence in Pride and Prejudice, right? Mr. Collins and his proposal to Elizabeth and him not hearing her and the oppression that she feels and the panic that she feels in that scene when it's like, you're just not listening. I'm trying very hard to say no to you, but like, you're not letting me. Elizabeth manages it better than Catherine does because Elizabeth is a far stronger character in terms of like her own personal character than Catherine is. Elizabeth is also a more interesting character as like a fiction than Catherine is, admittedly, but that's fine. Catherine is, has a much harder time defending herself. And so she's prey to these cruel, manipulative, quote unquote, friends. And then again, thinks very poorly of some other people that she encounters who are also being a bit socially cruel to her in a very different way.
That's so interesting what you say about social horror. That's such a really interesting way of formulating it because, that moment you were talking about in Pride and Prejudice where Mr. Collins is just not listening to Elizabeth, the way she manages that and manages to not have, not to be too vulnerable is, not to be all like patriarchy, but patriarchy. Like she leaves knowing what will happen is her mother will get upset and her mother will go to her father and her father will, as he always does, back her up.
Right.
Because that's in fact what happens, right? So she's got this kind of, I don't know what to call it, this recourse, this kind of knowledge that there's another power source that's going to protect her from that social danger.
Yeah, she's got a safety net.
She got a safety net. Whereas here it seems quite different. There seems to be much higher level of vulnerability, and therefore that's where the horror comes from, right?
Right. The friend of the family, the rich friend of the family who has invited her to Bath, she is useless. She's just interested in fashion. She's willing to let Catherine do whatever Catherine wants. She can offer no advice in the way that you want your maternal substitute figure to do in these situations that, you encounter in other Austen books. Like, she is at sea, and there are people who are very willing to take advantage of her for that. It's really, the first time I read it, like I caught on the silliness, but I didn't quite catch on to the horror aspect of it. And horror might be the wrong term, but it felt right when I was reading it. Like, it's really upsetting what they do to her. I realized this time through.
Do they get their comeuppance?
Well, what do you think? Yes, of course, everything works out well in the end. And the bad people are punished and the good people are married, and it's all very good. And I don't know, it's delightful, and it's a short little fun book, and I encourage everybody who hasn't tried it to give it another glance. But I also wanted to say that I returned to this book in part because I wanted to, reread it and re-enjoy it, and in part because I had never looked at the literature that it's making fun of. I knew that it was a satire of Gothic novels, and I knew in particular that there was one novel that's very important to it, The Mysteries of Udolpho by Anne Radcliffe. Like, that's the key novel that this book is in dialogue with. It's mentioned several times in the novel. She quotes from it several times. I'd never read it. And I thought, maybe I should give this weird little novel a try that, like, Jane Austen seemed to find worth, I don't know, playing with or making fun of or something. So I read Anne Radcliffe's The Mysteries of Udolpho.
How was it?
So good.
Oh.
It was so good. And I have to say, I listened to it on an audiobook mostly. It's really long. I listened to it on an audiobook mostly, and the narrator was fantastic. I'll put a link in the show notes to the version that I listened to if anybody's interested. But I thought it was a delightful reading, not like over the top delightful, although over the top in the sense that The Mysteries of Udolpho takes place in the 16th century, and it takes place largely in southern France, and then they go to Italy where Udolpho is. And the narrator made what seemed like at the beginning, the absolutely wild choice to give every character a French accent.
Oh no.
But all the characters are French. So our young heroine, Emily Saint-Aubert, from 16th century Gascony, has a loving father and soon meets a promising young man named Valancourt. But then her father dies, and she goes through all kinds of troubles.
Et là.
Yeah, indeed. And I sort of realized this as I was reading it. Like, Emily, our main character here, is perfect, of course. She is noble and good and flawless, and she tries to stand up for herself as best she can while also not doing anything inappropriate. Like, she doesn't go as far as Elizabeth Bennet does. She's not going to talk back to Lady Catherine de Bourgh. Like, she's going to maintain her station, Emily will, and that's going to cause problems for her down the road. It's going to cause complications. But the point of having a sort of angelically good character is to make all sorts of terrible things happen to them, because that's the fun of it, is to torture them.
Oh, dear.
So she's put under the control of a family member who's not very considerate, and then that aunt marries somebody who takes her away to the castle of Udolpho. So she's locked up in this morbid Gothic castle and has all sorts of terrible secrets, and he's the worst person ever, and is completely manipulative, and like, they keep trying to marry her off to gain good connections, and it becomes this like terrible. They're trying to sell this teenage girl off to somebody, basically. It's really bad. Like, it doesn't happen, but like it's quite bad, and she is never quite fully bodily at risk except in that sense, I suppose. Like, but it's a lot. Like, she goes through
Sounds exhausting.
a lot. It is very exhausting, and it's very delightful. And of course, it's written in the 18th century. It's written in a very precise and deliberate and long-winded style, which I think works better in audiobook format than it might have on the page, at least for me. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. I did look at the text occasionally as well, of course, but like, I was just enjoying these long paragraphs. And I don't know, if you've been to an opera, you know how like people say goodbye to each other for a long time. Sometimes in operas, it goes on for 20 minutes of just two people loving each other and saying goodbye. We won't see each other again for many years. Like, that kind of thing happens so often in this book, where people express their emotions minutely and at length, or express their thoughts minutely or at length to such an extent and with such thoroughness, but also with like incredibly well balanced and gently cascading out sentences. It was such a delight. I did not expect it to be as delightful. I don't know why I was into it. On paper, this isn't my kind of book, but I thoroughly had fun with this, and was, by the end of it, I was just like, I simply must find out what happens next.
It's so interesting what you're describing, because it's such a strong counterpoint to what we're talking about in Pride and Prejudice, at least, and probably Austen's novels in general, where there's so much emotion, but it's so restrained. Like the number of words used to give voice to an emotion is very limited. Whereas this is exactly the opposite of that. It's like prolix, right? It's like extended and expanded out to its maximum capacity, right?
Absolutely. And of course, Austen's world and its terrors are so social and so much within society. Whereas what happens in this book, like in Wuthering Heights, is stuff that happens outside of society, right? You're pulled out of your comfortable village, and you're pulled out of courtly life often, or you're brought to a different court where everything's, they go to Venice at some point and everything's corrupt and whatnot. Like, that's where the plot interest and the horror and the motivation comes from in this book, versus Austen really narrowing in on this domestic social space.
Wow.
Which is completely different, but there's also in conversation with each other. Like, I realize that Austen is like, she's making a little fun of it, but she also is doing it in a loving way. One of the things that I particularly enjoyed reading or rereading Northanger Abbey after having read the massive mysteries of Udolpho is that Catherine Morland, our heroine, who is currently reading the book, gets a lot of details wrong whenever she talks about it.
Oh, interesting.
She gets characters' names wrong.
She
misremembers of it. She's a bad reader of these romances. And it's like, that made the whole thing even funnier. That like,
is interesting.
Her brain is being addled by misremembering details. It's such a perceptive thing to do, I think, on Austen's part, to have her not fully, like, not remembering the detail, but really understanding the emotional thrust of what's going on. Because that's the exciting part, right? The way it made you feel, the sense of mystery and unknown about like what's happening in that part of the castle. Oh, she nails that perfectly while getting the details wrong. It's so spot on for the character.
So is the fact that Catherine doesn't remember the details correctly and so on, how can I put it? Is that linked to the fact that when she interprets the world she encounters in terms of the book she's read, is that because she's a bad reader, that her interpretations are, faulty, or is something else going on there?
I think it's partially that she's not attentive to details. And she's not, Emma and Elizabeth Bennet are smart. Catherine Morland is not smart.
Yeah. Which
I think makes it a harder read for some people, right? Because she's a less appealing heroine than Elizabeth Bennet, right? She's kind of silly. She's sweet enough, but she's kind of silly. And that's fine. Like, we've all got silly friends, but she's not a very well-rounded character, which is another reason why it feels like juvenilia, is because it's so stark. But it needed to be for this kind of novel, I think.
Well, I have a question. So in terms of her misunderstanding of what's going on, I can't find the passage right now, but I read the passage in the book where she's talking to Henry and she's in the house and she's just come up with this idea that maybe the general killed his wife,
Right.
And Henry's like completely freaked out that she thinks this. He's like, what is wrong with you?
Yes,
I mean, he doesn't say it in
yes.
so many words, but like, that's basically it. And what it is we know that it's because she reads these books and, in the world of those books, that would be what happened here. Right. And Henry is like trying to figure out, how could you possibly think this? Right. And I just thought that was such an interesting scene because, like, it's not that maybe not the sharpest crayon on the box, but it's because she lives in that world of books that she's imagining this mystery at the heart of the dwelling. And he is just like totally freaked out that she has this misapprehension.
Of course, it's an incredibly rude and obnoxious thing to think
I think your
about
father
the person
killed. So I think your father killed your mother.
Yeah, it's like, okay, this person who's been, he's being sort of falsely kind to her at first because he thinks she's rich and because he thinks she's a good prospect for his son. But like, he's been fine. It's only because they live in an abbey that she thinks that there must be something terrible going on. The book requires her to be more interested in the emotion in that broad sense, or the desire for a big emotion, than it is in terms of just straight up facts. She doesn't try to confirm. She's no Jane. Like, she doesn't try to confirm facts. She doesn't think of alternative hypotheses. She's like, this is what must be happening. The wildest thing imaginable.
Yeah.
And now that I've got this in my mind, like, everything is going to confirm it.
Yeah. And that's why I think Henry is so incredibly incredulous. I found the passages at the end of chapter 9 in book 2. And this is him talking. If I understand you rightly, you had formed a surmise of such horror as I hardly have words to. Dear Miss Morland, consider the dreadful nature of the suspicions you have entertained. What have you been judging from? Remembering the country and the age in which we live. Remember that we are English, that we are Christians. Consult your own understanding, your sense of the probable. And he goes on at length and says, and ends, Dearest Miss Morland, what ideas have you been admitting? They had reached the end of the gallery, and with tears of shame, she ran off to her own room. It's like, she's way out there.
So, all right, that is actually, I forgot about that part of the passage. So yes, absolutely, she's way out there. He understands what's going on and knows that she's like this, but still is kind of shocked at how far she took it.
Yeah.
Which is great. But also that whole bit there, remember that we are English.
I know, and Christians.
So I had been wondering while I was reading The Mysteries of Udolpho, like, why is this taking place in France and Italy?
Because English people don't do that.
Yeah. That sort of answered it. Was a little bit of literary criticism in the middle of this, explaining something I had been a little bit confused about the other book. It's like, oh, right. Yeah, no, English people don't do that. Of course not. Of course. Does our education prepare us for such atrocities? No, God. Of course not. No. That's a dark line. There was one other thing I wanted to mention about The Mysteries of Udolpho, which is that it spends quite a long time talking about people's countenances. Emily, our heroine, trusts in people's countenances, and some of the other characters make fun of her a bit for this, for being like, well, you have to play politics, you have to play subtlety with people, like, people are tricksy and so forth, but you're always so trusting of people's countenances, like you can understand if they're a good person or a bad person based on how they look and how they carry themselves and all that. And yet in Udolpho, Emily is basically correct. The people that she trusts are the people she should be trusting, and the people she doesn't trust are the people she should not be trusting. Pride and Prejudice quite explicitly goes out of its way to have Darcy have a terrible countenance but have good personality and be a generally kind person, and Wickham have a beautiful countenance that makes everybody in the world just trust him implicitly, and then turn out to be a scoundrel. And, reading that after having read Udolpho, it seems like that is also a bit of a response to this line of thinking that pops up in that novel. And I thought that was really interesting as well.
Yeah, the original title of the early version of Pride and Prejudice is First Impressions, right?
Yeah.
So it's about that discrepancy between what you first see and what might lie behind, right?
Yes, exactly. So it is a big book, and but there's a good audiobook for it. I don't know, everybody, if you're interested, also check out The Mysteries of Udolpho. It was lots of fun.
The other book that The Mysteries of Udolpho turns up in as a point of reference is Little Women. Do you remember that?
I did not remember that, but I did notice it when I was reading up on it, yes.
Yeah, it's one of the books that the March sisters are really into.
Yeah, and as well they should be. I am now also a big fan of this book. Did not expect that from 2025, but I am here for The Mysteries of Udolpho.
Excellent.
Well, all right, Jane Austen is wonderful, but I imagine that there have been other exciting things that you've been up to lately.
And you too, right? You were traveling not too long ago.
I was traveling. I went to Portland and I got to read a poem at this lovely poetry conference that was going on. And it was very well received. And I was very happy for that. And then I fell ill and had to go to the ER. So I didn't get to enjoy the rest of the poetry conference, which, that was no fun. I am fine. I am basically fine. We're dealing with things. I'm not going to get into it, but it was unfortunate, and it was not exactly not exactly the experience I was hoping to have on that travel. But still, I'm glad I got to do at least a little of it.
At least you did part of it, and maybe you'll get back to Portland again before too long.
Yes. So recovering from that incident has been much of my October, as well as reading some Jane Austen and Anne Radcliffe. What have you been up to, though?
Well, I was just this past week was helping to host the annual Muncie Language and History Symposium down at Princeton, and this is something I think I might have mentioned in the past. It's something we've been doing every year in the fall. This is the 5th year we've done it, and it kind of is interesting to reflect on one particular part of that gathering, which was organized with Lenape language keepers from different Muncie-speaking Lenape communities. We had different aspects, museum work, land-based work on seed rematriation and so on. But we also had a session on Lenape books. And that was really cool because in the past we've had discussions of Lenape books that were kind of historical, going over to Princeton University Library special collections and, talking about books from the 17th or 18th century and that, right? But this was present day books that Lenape people are doing, which was really fun. There was one presentation that was on a forthcoming graphic novel that is done by community members about a member of the community, Arnold Logan, who was a soldier in World War I. And then there was somebody else who was presenting a recently republished book called Brown Tom's School Days, which is, it's
That's a really good title.
It is. It's a lovely play on, Tom Brown's School Days, written by Enos Montour, who was a member of the Delaware Band at Six Nations of the Grand River Territory, reflecting on his experience in residential school. And so that's super interesting. And other presenters talked about different books that were, connected to Lenape history. And one of them in particular was really fascinating. One of the speakers is a person called John Nicholas, who was sharing a book that had been published by his parents. His father passed away in the late 1950s. His mother continued the work and finally got this book published in the early 1970s. It's called Cry of the Ancients. And it's basically, how can I put it? It feels odd, I think, to many present day readers, even people who are members of the Muncie, Delaware community that they come from, because it's written in a style that's kind of, I wish you would call it a hortatory style, like where it's kind of exhorting you to action. It's a certain kind of language. I think you have to read it in the context of what was going on in Native American activism in that period. And, it fits oddly in some ways with where people are at now. So it's a book that is, I think, feels kind of uncomfortable in some ways for folks, but there's also a real tremendous value in coming back to it. And anyway, so John Nicholas was sharing a little bit about that, and I was really fascinated by this and would love to carry that conversation forward at some point.
Yeah, that all sounds very, very exciting. This is maybe a little bit of an inside baseball kind of question, I suppose, but in terms of these new books and graphic novels that are coming out, I'm curious who's publishing them. Are they being published by university presses, by commercial presses, by presses run by the community? Is it like how is that part of it working out?
Yeah, that's actually a really good question. I'm just checking real quickly. If I remember correctly, Brown Tom's School Days is published by, I think it's University. Yeah, it's University of Manitoba Press. But there's a really interesting story behind this. He had actually written it like a long time ago. I think it was back in the 70s also. Tried really hard to find a publisher and was never able to do it, and so self-published it, like basically in the ways you would like mimeograph back in the 70s.
Yeah.
There was a small number of copies that were produced for the community. And then in 2024, Mary Jane McCallum, who's a faculty member at the University of Winnipeg and also a member of Muncie Delaware Nation, she edited the book, wrote an introduction for it, and brought it through publication at University of Manitoba Press. So in that case, it's kind of, I guess it's an academic setting that it's coming out of, but it's very readable. It's a really fascinating book.
Like, that's why I asked the question, right? Because there's an interesting history about the inability to get these books published and the ways that people dealt with that inability to get them published, and how now there's at least some, some outlets that can bring these out for a wider audience or publish them in hopefully a more sustainable way. I don't know. I'd be curious to hear people talk about, and I'm sure they are talking about, what the publication options and landscape looks like for them these days.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really important point.
Well, we have had quite a lot to say about Jane Austen's novels, as well we should. It was a great joy to return to these texts for me, and it sounds like you had a lot of fun as well.
And happy birthday, Jane Austen.
Happy birthday. It's
great job on the books.
It's December 16th for anybody who wants to mark it in their calendar. I'll try to remember to celebrate it again then, but...
What kind of snacks would be appropriate to celebrate Jane Austen's birthday, do you think?
Ooh.
Maybe a really nice tea?
Well, yes, I'm sure you can get teas. I'm sure if you search for Jane Austen branded food products, you will get them. Oh, some milk punch. There definitely was a lot of punch in there.
White soup?
Oh, no. That's, if I remember what white soup is, it's a bit nasty.
I looked it up. It's made with beef stock, ground up almonds, egg yolks, and a kind of hot mulled red wine.
Right.
It sounds gross.
It's certainly, it's certainly not for me. But, all right. Well, listeners, if you've had white soup or you want to tell us about it, you know where to write us. You can email us at spouter@megaphonic.fm, and we would love to hear from you. This show is made possible by people like you supporting us on Patreon, and patrons get to hang out with us in a friendly Discord. You can find out more at patreon.com/megaphonic, and show notes with links for things that we've mentioned in this episode will be at megaphonic.fm/spouter/86. And the Spouter-Inn is one of the fancy little podcasts over at Megaphonic FM. So until next time,
see you again at the Spouter-Inn.